Your Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa, Emir of the State of Qatar, Your Highness Sheikh Hamza bin Nasser, Chairperson of Qatar Foundation, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome to this exceptional event that showcases, amongst other things, how Qatar Foundation makes possible the kind of synergies between institutions such as Georgetown University, Hamad bin Khalifa University, and this superb Qatar National Convention Center, the kind of synergies that enable events like tonight's to materialize. It's these kinds of synergies, in fact, that Georgetown University itself and our students and professors find so valuable, and that we think help bring the sort of added value to the intellectual life and development of Qatar that individual institutions by themselves would not be able to bring. My name is Gert Nonneman. I have the privilege and pleasure to play a small role in this endeavor as Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar. And it is also my privilege and pleasure to be able to introduce to you a man who needs no introduction at all. Mohamed Hassanein Heikal, perhaps the most renowned and influential journalist in the whole Arab world, and indeed one of the best known journalists anywhere, I would say, when it comes to analyzing and commenting on the politics and the international affairs of the Middle East. There are few personalities who share our speaker's breadth of experience and direct knowledge of some of the events, some of the most important events that have shaped recent Middle East history. His documentation of these events, both in his work as a journalist and as an author of significant books, have long informed discussion around the world, including in the Arab world itself, of course, and in countless classrooms, of which some of my classrooms in the past have been an example. And of course, including discussions amongst our students at Georgetown. So this presentation tonight is a very special opportunity to hear projections for the future of the region from a witness of its history. Mohamed Heikal was editor-in-chief of Al-Ahram, perhaps the best-known Arab newspaper, for 17 years until 1974. And in one instance of his own integrity, the fact that he didn't simply say what people told him to say, he then fell out with President Sadat. He started out his career, in fact, with the Egyptian Gazette as a young journalist, later moved to Akhir Sa'a, and as a young emerging journalist, he covered things, conflicts all the way from the Battle of Alamein, the Second World War, to, of course, other aspects of World War II, the Palestine Wars, the Mossadegh Revolution in Iran, even the Korea War and parts of the Vietnam War. And then, of course, on to more recent conflicts, and I'm sure many of you have read some of his works on that. But more than a mere journalist and observer, he was in some ways a participant in Egyptian politics, being close, of course, originally to President Nasser, and then for some time to President Sadat. He often had a ringside view, a ringside seat, even at the events and meetings that shaped Egyptian and Arab politics. He's also, as I already intimated, a prolific author with a plethora of books published in Arabic, in English, in French, and a whole raft of other languages. As I said just a minute ago, many have featured for decades on university reading lists about the region and about international affairs. Just some of the most famous include Kalam fi Siyasa, in New York, ila Kabul, Sphinx and Commissar, Nasser, the Cairo Documents, Cutting the Lion's Tail, Suez Through Egyptian Eyes, You see one going through, picking out a few, going through history. The Road to Ramadan. Then Autumn of Fury, about the assassination of Sadat. Return of the Ayatollah. Secret Channels. Iran, the Untold Story, about America's involvement. Illusions of Triumph, which was about the Gulf War and its historical and political context, and so on. And those are really just a small selection. And he remains as active as ever. In fact, I just heard from both himself and his wife, so it must be true, he's never retiring. He couldn't possibly retire. And many of you will also know him through his series of lectures on Al Jazeera. And just now, he's involved in the production of yet another series for CBCS. I forget the precise acronym, but I'm sure he'll put me right, in Egypt. In fact, he had to interrupt his work on that to come here and be with us tonight. So we are doubly grateful for his presence among us tonight. So, without further ado, Ustad Mohamed Hassanein Heikal, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Your Highness and the Amir, Your Highness, Sheikh Hamouza, I am grateful to Your Highness for your gracious attendance, and I must express my gratitude to Her Highness who is sitting beside you. I'm not surprised, in fact, we are her being the president of Qatar Foundation, and we are here because of her kind invitation. And Your Highnesses, I know how busy you are, and I know about your commitment, and this alone will take up all your time, whether your project, your national project for Qatar, or your responsibilities at the Arab level, at the regional level, and the world at large, and the immensely important role you play in all of this in a new era of history. And my feeling of gratitude multiplies when I remember when I came for tea at Al Wajba Palace, and after 2 hours of continuous conversation about the affairs of the Arab world, you told me that you want to be with us this evening, but when you realized the title of this lecture, you felt somewhat that maybe your presence will inhibit me, and you would like me to be free to say what I say, because in your belief, freedom is of the utmost importance, and I'm very, very glad that you made it. And you know, Your Highness, what attracts me to you since the day I met you, that before you became the Emir of your country, as a young man, as a student, you were an advocate of free speech and free expression, and you always promoted that, and you expect that to be part and parcel of your dealings with others. And this is why I respect you more than anything, and for your love of my country, Egypt. And I've seen you practicing that, and you always said that Egypt is not an Arab country, it's a homeland for the entire Arab nation. So therefore, Your Highness, this is not just a feeling, this is a historic stance, and it's testimony to where your heart and mind is. So thank you very much, Your Highnesses, for being here with us this evening. And also, Dean, I thank you very much for your kind invitation for me to come to this series of distinguished lectures, and which is part of your other events and the enlightening role you play in this country, which adds to desert life a new dimension. And I use this expression because this imagined perceived line in the desert is not something imaginary or non-existent. It is like the other lines that divide this planet of Earth. They really give us a scope of witnessing and seeing what happens. Here we have a division. There is the Arab land and there is the Iranian land and the world after. And since the 60s of last century, and after the independence of India, and after the end of the Cold War, and also at the end of the Suez crisis, I witnessed all these events, and I was part of the negotiations with Sir William Luce and other representatives of the British Empire. And at that time, the future of the Gulf was on the table, and the part of the struggle between the British retreating British Empire and the ascending Arab pan-nationalism. And in that day, the impact of that on the Gulf was becoming apparent to its people, its nations, these small countries which began to build, and this ambitious project was really trying to employ all means available of natural resources because of the very geographical location between of the Gulf countries, and which is at the center of many new and old conflicts. So therefore this is a line which is never easy. Dean, thank you very much. After thanking you for the invitation, I pose two questions that we must ponder carefully, because universities by their nature prefer an academic talk to political ones, and the political ones are always perceived as power struggles and projections of the future. And this is what I do in view of the precedents I know which we can take, for example, and as guiding principles despite the many changes. And you may remember Sir Winston Churchill's lecture in 1946, in which he drew attention to an iron curtain as becoming or descending to Europe. And I tried on many occasions afterwards, and I tried to use universities as a platform when it came to talking about turning points in Arab histories. When I did that with the Oslo agreements between Israel and Palestine in October 1993, I had a lecture entitled Oslo and Jericho, First and Last, and tried to shed light on what the Palestinians thought was the beginning of a solution was in fact the beginning of the end, which put an end to their cause. And also I talked about the question of succession of power in the days of the former Egyptian president, who wants to imitate a model which became prevalent in the Arab world. And also when it came to Oslo agreement, my warnings were not heeded, but in the case of the second event, my early warning was heeded, and my talk was at Cairo University, and the second talk about this here at Georgetown University in Doha. This time round, I chose another political theme to talk about the affairs of the Arab East and the Middle East. And if I do not follow the common expectations, maybe is due to the fact that what happens here is known, and we in this Levant area or the Middle East are still existing on the remnants of a past which does not know how to retreat, and a future which does not know how to advance. So therefore we are trying to rid ourselves of the shackles of a past and break our way through to a new future, benefiting from the experiences of the others in a way which is like a new creature is being born, and people are like an old Persian poet said, people make ablution in blood but do not know how to observe a congregation prayer. And in this we must try and look forward to see what the future holds for this nations, a nation which decided to defeat silence and chart a new future, although there are many warning signs awaiting around the corner. And we know for a fact that moving forward is the way, but with or despite the shackles of the past. I will now come to the theme of tonight's talk. I remember His Highness the Emir and our friend Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani has talked to me in the past about the future of the Gulf and security. This was many years ago, and as it happened, we were in the Al-Gardaqa city on the Red Sea in Egypt at a time when the other bank of that sea was distant away but still visible, and this reminded us that we do not live in isolation as some may think. I told His Highness that the Gulf is at the heart of the designs of many countries and powers. Secondly, there are three big countries, Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Iran, which are the major powers in the Gulf, but at that time they were busy with their own affairs. Thirdly, there is a kind of a balance between the kind of pressure that any of these countries can apply and vis-a-vis Egypt, Syria and the surrounding countries. Fourthly, the special interest of the West, America and Europe is there, and the very location and the energy demands and others are important factors in this. Fifth and finally, the natural resources the new Gulf countries will always be a determining factor, and this can be a good investment which can be of benefit to your countries at the short term and long term. And my estimation at that time was these countries have no option but to watch events carefully, and since that day of Al-Gardaqa, the winds were noticed strongly in this area. Changes have occurred, and ladies and gentlemen, I can recite a number of these changes which occurred and impacted events. First of all, the space of the area from the Arabian Peninsula to Syria and the surrounding area, witnessing a great deal of destruction, both at the human and material level. If we don't do anything about it, at least we must ponder the consequences, and at least we should know that there is a vacuum of power in and around the Gulf, and this can attract all sorts of untold calamities. Secondly, what happened in Iran even before the Islamic Revolution, and what happened between Iran and Iraq after that revolution, and what problems and sectarian strifes between Shiite and Sunnis, all of that has converged on the area, and this impacted an area which is already a hot spot in nearby areas like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thirdly, and for centuries, it was thought that the Arab strategic depth is part and parcel of the strategic considerations for the Gulf, and this has become apparent over the years. This is only natural because, as in nature, we have seasons for everything, and this interaction coincided in the Gulf with some tremendous tremors and at all levels, at economic, social and political, and earthquakes of this kind have tremors, and also it's difficult to estimate the degree of destruction they leave behind, and this applies to politics as much as to natural phenomenon. And also unemployment in the Gulf is on the increase. Some people think in some 15 to 20 years the population of Saudi Arabia will be 50 million. Yemen can be the same. In other words, one block of 100 million people will occupy the Arabian Peninsula and spill over to others. But this, like any other action of its sort, the displacement of the sort will mean other consequences. It will not only on the level of the resources required, but also the wind of change which will blow because of the new social networks and the impact of modern technology and people's longing for freedom. Fifth, the oil in the Arab countries. There it seems that with the new discoveries of oil in Africa and Asia, and the efforts by science and technology to decrease the level of dependence on one source for energy, and this is apparent in what the United States is doing. They managed to lower their dependence on the Arab oil by some 40% by using shale gas and other resources, and we know that oil is a strategic commodity which is not different than any other throughout history, and its future is subject to the same prevalent conditions. Yes, we can consider the 20th century as the century of oil, but there were other centuries had different descriptions. The 15th century was the century of trade between East and West, and spices and others, and the geographical discoveries and the Cape of Good Hope and others played a role putting certain countries and continents on the world map. And this was probably the most important event. The 16th century was the century of gold and silver and the New World, and in Spain and Portugal they called it the Golden Century. The 17th century was the century of slavery and sugar, because slavery was the main aspect, and the Caribbean countries were the center of the hottest conflict in the world. And what is amazing that the most prominent mansion houses in the English countryside are standing today witness to that century. And then we had cotton, iron, and railways, and petrol, then the car, then the airplane, then the satellites, until the 21st century, when we see now that this will bypass oil and put black gold in its natural position. An industry like any other, a commodity like any other, demanded, yes, but the demand does not lead to war and peace. Number 6, we still witness a struggle at the imperial level. The hot spots of this is moving fast towards the east, and if we can say that any empire is a huge country with resources and prevalent economic power and military power, and also expansion into its outside borders, then we are witnessing the birth of new empires, and therefore this competition between empires is moving towards the Pacific. The Atlantic was the hot spot since the discovery of America. Then Europe at the days of Napoleon and Hitler. Then came the Mediterranean, and it became a hot spot after the emergence of the Soviet Union and until the end of the Cold War. And after the Islamic Revolution in Iran and after the so-called Arab Spring, the hot spot of imperial conflict and struggle moved to the straits of the Gulf, Arabian Gulf, and now we see that this hot spot is moving eastwards when we see the emergence of China and the renewed ascendance of Japan and India following suit. So therefore the next century will an Asian one, much like the last one, which was American, and the one before it European. And this tells us that the power of empires is not just a legacy which is inherited. It looks more like a competition or a race with even more dangerous consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no sound mind which can imagine world wars, but we still have to be careful, because to the east of this Gulf there are 5 nuclear powers. There is the United States with its aircraft carriers, there is India, China, and North Korea, and all are declared nuclear powers, and some have their problems like India and Pakistan and China and Japan, and also North Korea is a player with some stances which may lead to untold consequences. Also, there is a scientific base in Japan, and despite what we're told that the Japanese people dislike of nuclear weapons, and Australia and South Korea also have the capabilities, but not at the level of having ready nuclear powers. Israel, of course, and to a certain extent Iran. So therefore, bearing in mind all of these factors, that the nuclear power is not used easily, but it is the best deterrent despite the moral consequences of that. Despite all the constraints and limits, we will see a nuclear race, even if it wasn't for military purposes. And the country I come from, Egypt, in the beginning of the 60s, had a project for nuclear research and manufacturing missiles, although it was not designed for military purposes. But we must don't forget that having the scientific capability can lead to a change into a military aspect. So therefore, all these storms which are gathering in the horizon, and by that I mean the problem or the conflict of the Iranian nuclear project, and in a period of time which may not go beyond the end of this year, will reach its critical point. And there is two possibilities. Either the Iranians reach their aim and manufacture their bomb, or Israel and the US execute their threats and hit Iran and destroy it and put an end to it. And in either case, there will be political and strategic consequences for that. And it's noticeable that some political powers in the Gulf seem to be of the opinion that this will be a surgical strike, a clean surgical strike, and they feel optimistic towards. Although I must say that even if it was such a clean surgical strike, it will have consequences that not many antibiotics can find a cure for. So therefore, America's keenness on changing the regime in Iran is closely related to this new emergence of the political powers in the East, and the Iranian land is like the rear base for any changes in the East map of the world. In the East, at the heart of the Middle East, the Gulf, and going further into East, it's obvious to us all, and it's apparent that the conditions prevalent in the Gulf have changed eastwards and westwards, and therefore this new line, this perceived line, is likely to face a lot of friction, and hence the question for the future. We all remember that the people of Mecca know its internal affairs, as they say, but this, of course, with the increase in the sensitivities and the inter-Arab and inter-Gulf relations, which leaves us where we stand now. In the past, any Arab with the power of issuing a political fatwa or edict will do so, and the experiences tell us that. But the dictionary of such fatwas will remind us that we really need to consider carefully that how many pages of that dictionary were torn off, so much so that we no longer have the authoritative references that we can go back to. Therefore, unfortunately, the political project for the Arabs, unfortunately, is rendered hopelessly now and standing still, and therefore the people of the Gulf, who know best what their conditions are, should be the first to try and learn from the experience in the past. If they leave the door open for others to pass fatwas determining their fate, they should remember the consequences of that. And finally, the competence of the Gulf people, strategic thinking, are faced with formidable challenges, and if a friend can do anything for them, is to remind them that no changes which are conducive to their own good can come from the outside. And if we look at the location of the Gulf and its political and human makeup will determine for us. I'm not talking about now and tomorrow. What I'm talking about is the day after tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Highnesses, thank you also for gracing us with your presence. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me, it was worth having this extraordinary event organized here. Apart from the obvious, for me personally, this is someone whose work I've lived with for decades. So this is truly an extraordinary opportunity. But on this note, I would just like to say thanks on behalf of Georgetown, on behalf, I'm sure, of everyone here. And I don't want to speak for other organizations, but I'm sure that their thanks are equally heartfelt. Briefly say from the microphone what it is. It is something that we give to our most distinguished visitors and some key alumni of Georgetown, and it is an astrolabe. A typical thing from the Arab world, brought to its height of development in the Arab world, about pointing the way forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a translation in English. Brilliant.